Like if you enjoyed listening, let us know in the comments what spooked you and give our video a share. Thank you and subscribe to Sinister Shadow Studio for more horror stories.
The echoing void. Shirley's voice echoed in the old church, but it was unlike any melody anyone had ever heard. It was a hymn, but one of despair. Her voice wasn't alone. There was a chorus, but no one else was singing. Father Thomas had seen his share of hardships, but the state in which he found Shirley was the most unsettling yet. Her once vivid blue eyes were black, her golden locks matted with sweat, her delicate face twisted in a permanent scream. Sister Margaret, the nun who had found Shirley, had called Father Thomas in a desperate voice. "It's possession, Father, like nothing I've ever seen." When Father Thomas entered, Shirley's head turned with an unnatural angle to meet his gaze. "Welcome," she crooned, her voice like gravel. The entity inside her was powerful. This was no ordinary possession. "How many are inside you?" Father Thomas asked, sprinkling holy water on her. The girl's skin sizzled at contact, but the chorus of voices laughed. "Many," they replied. Father Thomas began the rite of exorcism. As he chanted, the air grew cold and the candles flickered. The voices inside Shirley became more frantic, shifting between screams, laughter, and taunts. Hours felt like minutes, and minutes felt like seconds. Suddenly, with a deafening cry, a dark cloud escaped from Shirley's mouth, circling Father Thomas before dissipating. The old church felt empty, silent. Shirley collapsed unconscious. Father Thomas, exhausted and drenched in sweat, knelt beside her. "Thank God," he whispered. But when Shirley woke, her eyes were still black. "You think you've won," she whispered. Her voice was different, singular, but equally chilling. Father Thomas's heart sank. The exorcism had expelled the legion, but a more powerful entity remained. "Who are you?" he demanded. She smiled. "The one that controls the many, the void that consumes. I am the emptiness." Father Thomas realized that he had underestimated the depth of the possession. This was not just about expelling a demon. He was facing pure, undiluted evil, an ancient entity. The church's walls seemed to close in. Father Thomas prayed for strength. The ritual started again, more intense. He pressed a crucifix to Shirley's forehead, chanting louder and with more conviction. The entity fought back. The church trembled. The windows shattered, and unseen hands tried to strangle Father Thomas. But he persisted, drawing strength from his unwavering faith. As dawn approached, the entity's resistance waned. With one final prayer, Father Thomas commanded the entity to leave. With a scream that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality, the entity departed, leaving Shirley's body limp. Tears streamed down Father Thomas's face as he cradled the young girl. Her blue eyes slowly opened, filled with confusion and fear. She was free at last. But the battle had taken its toll on Father Thomas. The strength he had displayed was gone, replaced by an overwhelming fatigue. He had faced the embodiment of emptiness and had won, but not without cost. Weeks later, as Shirley recovered surrounded by the love of her community, Father Thomas sought solace in solitude. He had questions that haunted him. The entity spoke of being an emptiness. Was it a metaphor or a revelation of a greater cosmic horror? One evening, as he was deep in contemplation, he heard a whisper. "You cannot banish the void, Father." He turned, but no one was there. Instead, he found himself looking at his own reflection, his eyes pitch black. Father Thomas realized that in saving Shirley, he had become the new vessel. The battle was far from over. The Reliquary. Within the small, isolated town of Loresdale, a legend persisted about the Hartman estate. The imposing manor, now decrepit with time, had been deserted for decades. It was whispered that its final resident, Eleanor Hartman, was taken by a spirit, and her last refuge was a locked room, a reliquary, full of artifacts her ancestors collected. Teenagers, often dared by their peers, would sometimes sneak into the house, trying to unlock the reliquary. None succeeded, and most fled in terror, speaking of whispering shadows and the feeling of being watched. One winter night, a group of friends, Maya, Liam, and Zoe, decided they would be the ones to finally unveil the secrets of the Reliquary. With bolt cutters in tow, they entered the mansion. Inside, the air was cold and oppressive, laden with the weight of 100 silent years. Old portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow them. Upon reaching the Reliquary door, Liam, with a smirk, positioned the bolt cutters around the rusted lock and applied pressure. It snapped open. Pushing the door, the room unveiled a trove of artifacts, masks, statues, vases, all meticulously arranged. At the room's center was an ornate mirror framed in gold, its surface dark and unreflective. Below it, an inscription read, "The Spirit's Prison, sealed in reflection." Drawn to the mirror, Maya approached and hesitantly touched its surface. The moment she did, her reflection grinned back, eyes turning a haunting shade of yellow. She stumbled back, her scream echoing throughout the mansion. Zoe and Liam rushed to her, but it was evident something was wrong. Her eyes, once lively, now seemed distant, her movements disjointed. "It wants out," Maya whispered in a voice that wasn't hers. Her body contorted in unnatural angles, and a chorus of voices emitted from her, each more malevolent than the last. Realizing the gravity of their situation, Liam searched the room for a solution. Among the artifacts, he found an old journal, its pages yellowed. Flipping through hurriedly, he found an entry detailing an exorcism ritual. Reading aloud, Liam began the chant. The air grew colder, shadows dancing menacingly on the walls. Maya's body levitated, her face twisted in agony. Zoe, fighting back tears, held on to Maya, anchoring her to the ground. As Liam's voice grew louder, the mirror's surface rippled, the dark reflection beckoning, trying to pull the entity back. But the spirit resisted, its grip on Maya tightening. Summoning all her strength, Zoe screamed at the entity, "Let her go! Take me instead!" For a brief moment, everything stopped. Maya's body went limp. As Zoe met her friend's gaze, she saw not Maya, but the entity, its yellow eyes gleaming with malice. Without hesitation, Liam continued the chant, directing the spirit toward the mirror. Zoe's body, now under the entity's control, thrashed violently. But with each word Liam uttered, the pull of the mirror grew stronger. With a final defiant scream from the entity, Zoe was thrust forward, her reflection captured within the dark mirror once more. Gasping for breath, Maya and Liam rushed to Zoe, who lay motionless on the floor. As she slowly stirred, her eyes, clear and blue, met theirs. The trio, realizing the danger of the mirror, decided to reseal the Reliquary. They left the mansion, the weight of their experience pressing heavily upon them. Word spread about their encounter, and the townspeople, recognizing the threat the mirror posed, built a wall around the Hartman estate, ensuring no one would ever venture there again. However, in the heart of the town, within the quiet confines of her room, Zoe would sometimes stare into her vanity mirror, lost in thought. And on particularly silent nights, if you listened closely, you could hear a faint whisper, the remnants of a spirit's lament, forever trapped in reflection. Whispers in the attic. In the heart of the Midlands, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, sat the quaint village of Dunwich. It was in Dunwich that the renowned writer, Thomas Adair, resided in his ancestral home, a sprawling, antiquated manor replete with history and secrets. Thomas lived alone but was rarely lonely, always accompanied by his characters and narratives. He had, however, a curious habit. Each evening, as twilight approached, he would venture into the manor's attic, a space filled with old tomes, heirlooms, and memories. One evening, amidst piles of old parchments, he stumbled upon a leather-bound journal. Curious, he dusted it off and began to read. The journal belonged to his great-great-grandfather, Alistair Adair, who, as it transpired, had dabbled in the occult. Thomas was soon engrossed, particularly by an entry describing a ritual to converse with the dead. Intrigued and somewhat skeptical, Thomas decided to recreate the ritual, setting up candles and reciting the ancient incantations. No sooner had he spoken the final word, the room went cold. The flickering candlelight unveiled a shadowy figure in the attic's far corner. Its eyes glinted malevolently, its whispery voice echoing, freedom at last. Thomas awoke the next morning on the attic floor, the journal beside him. Brushing off the previous night's events as a dream, he resumed his daily routine. But soon, strange occurrences began. His writing, usually filled with romance and adventures, took a darker turn. Characters he'd known and loved faced horrific fates, with tales of possession, despair, and malevolence. More unsettling was the recurring character, a shadowy figure that seemed to echo the entity from the attic. Worried friends visited, only to find Thomas distant and erratic. He would mutter to himself, often in languages he had never known. And at night, a chilling lullaby would emanate from the attic, accompanied by the sound of scratching. Sarah, a childhood friend and historian, decided to intervene. Perusing through the journal, she discovered Alistair's notes on an exorcism, revealing that the entity was a trapped soul he'd summoned but failed to control. Realizing Thomas was possessed, Sarah sought the village's elder, Mrs. Havisham. Known for her knowledge of the arcane, she devised a plan. That night, as the lullaby once again filled the manor, Sarah and Mrs. Havisham ascended to the attic. They found Thomas, or the entity that controlled him, waiting. "It won't be banished again," it hissed, Thomas's voice distorted. Using the journal as a guide, Mrs. Havisham began the exorcism, her voice steady and resolute. As she chanted, the entity writhed, releasing a cacophony of voices, cries of anguish, sorrow, and rage. The attic's energy intensified, objects levitating and windows shattering. Sarah, holding onto the journal, joined in the chant, her voice merging with Mrs. Havisham's. As dawn's first light peeked through, the entity gave one final agonized scream, releasing its grip on Thomas. The manor grew silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Exhausted, Sarah and Mrs. Havisham attended to Thomas, who was bewildered but unharmed. Grateful for his rescue, he decided to seal the journal within the attic walls, ensuring the entity would never return. But in the village of Dunwich, as dusk melds into night, older residents still whisper tales of the haunted Adair Manor and the writer who conversed with shadows. And every so often, a chilling lullaby can still be heard, a haunting reminder of the thin line between curiosity and peril. Shadows of St. Agnes. St. Agnes Asylum had been abandoned for nearly 50 years, standing as a dark sentinel on the outskirts of Everwood town. Stories of hauntings had kept it isolated, a monument to past sins and memories too painful to reconcile. Most people steered clear, but for rebellious teens, it was a rite of passage to enter its foreboding halls. Emma, a 17-year-old with fiery red hair and an attitude to match, was determined to spend a night at St. Agnes. On a dare, she and her friends Jack, Lila, and Neil decided to venture into the asylum one summer evening. The entrance door creaked ominously as they stepped inside. Dust particles floated through the air, illuminated by the flashlights they carried. The long corridor ahead was filled with doors on either side, each leading to a room with peeling paint and remnants of its grim past. In a large communal room, they discovered a circle of chairs. In the center lay an old journal, its pages yellowed by time. Emma, ever the curious one, picked it up and began to read aloud. The journal detailed the experiments of Dr. Isaac Harrow, a once renowned psychiatrist who believed he could cure madness by drawing out evil spirits. The final entry spoke of a ritual that went horribly wrong, where Harrow himself became possessed. And thus, the evil remains trapped within these walls. Emma read the final lines. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room. Neil, the most superstitious of the group, nervously proposed they leave, but Lila, always one for drama, insisted they try the ritual described in the journal. The friends reluctantly agreed. Forming a circle, they recited the words Harrow had written. As the last syllable echoed, the room plunged into darkness. When their flashlights flickered back to life, Emma was gone. Panicking, they searched the asylum, calling out to her. It was Lila who found her, standing motionless in a dimly lit room. But the Emma they knew wasn't there. In her place stood a figure with hollow eyes and an unsettling grin. "Welcome," she whispered. her voice a distorted mockery of Emma's. Horrified, Jack, Lila, and Neil realized the ritual had released the spirit that possessed Dr. Harrow, and it had found a new host in Emma. Knowing they needed help, they left the asylum, promising to return with a priest. Father Marcus, an old exorcist known for his successes, listened gravely to their story. Armed with holy water and a crucifix, he led them back to St. Agnes. Inside, the asylum was eerily silent. They found Emma in the same room, floating inches above the ground, her red hair a fiery halo around her head. The evil spirit, recognizing Father Marcus, let out a terrifying scream. The exorcism began. Father Marcus chanted, sprinkling holy water as he circled Emma. The entity fought back, manipulating the environment. Chairs flew, windows shattered, and eerie voices echoed throughout the asylum. Emma, trapped within her own body, experienced glimpses of the evil that had taken hold. She saw through the spirit's eyes, visions of past atrocities and its insatiable thirst for souls. Hours passed, the battle between the mortal and the supernatural raged on. Father Marcus, drawing from a deep reservoir of faith, commanded the entity to leave. With one final blood-curdling scream, it complied, releasing its grip on Emma. Exhausted, the group left the asylum, sealing the entrance with sacred symbols to prevent any future disturbances. Emma, forever changed by her ordeal, devoted her life to studying the paranormal, determined to protect others from the darkness she'd encountered. Jack, Lila, and Neil, no longer skeptical of the supernatural, became her closest allies. But in the heart of Everwood, the shadows of St. Agnes Asylum remain, a testament to the dangers of tampering with forces beyond human comprehension. And even now, if you listen closely on a silent night, the chilling whispers of its haunted past can still be heard. Like and subscribe to Sinister Shadow Studio.